Eileen, would you like to start us off this afternoon?
Thank you. We've got some housekeeping notes, first of all, which is slightly boring, but it's got to be done. Firstly, the session is going to be recorded, so I would ask that everyone mute their microphone to reduce any background noise. I think Rebecca will have muted everybody at the moment, but if you have to unmute yourself to speak, then can you remember to mute yourself again afterwards? We won't be taking questions from the floor as there are over 50 people signed up to this event, but Anne Harrod will be monitoring the chat box. So we would appreciate it if you have any questions, type them in the chat box, and also put which speaker you would like to answer your question as well. And then these will be addressed at the Q&A times. Okay. So, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Eileen Longworth. I'm the present chair of Dumfries and Galloway ME and Fibromyalgia Network. The network is a charity registered in Scotland for over 20 years, which recently upgraded to a SKIO. At present, we are in a transition stage, but the SKIO will be fully running from the 1st of August this year. Our aim is to support people in Dumfries and Galloway who suffer with myalgic encephalomyelitis, ME, fibromyalgia, FM, chronic fatigue syndrome, CFS, and the post-exertional malaise symptoms of long COVID. The network raises awareness of the issues surrounding these conditions. We investigate and provide information about all aspects, symptoms, and treatments available for ME, CFS, FM, and long COVID. We offer support to any person suffering with any of these issues and any matter concerning them. We also facilitate a mutual support network. We have 3 closed Facebook groups where our members can interact with each other on any subject, ranging from how to cope, how to explain the conditions to family and friends, a bit of humorous banter, and sharing arts and crafts projects. There are Zoom meetings every week in place of the face-to-face get-togethers we used to favour before the pandemic. We have a website which is regularly updated with information, research articles, a monthly blog, and a quarterly newsletter. We act as a central point for representative consultation between our members and other agencies, including Dumfries and Galloway Council, the NHS, and benefits agencies. We've been fortunate enough to be awarded funding for a feasibility study regarding our hoped-for future projects, namely a befriending scheme and an expert patient mentoring scheme, and also the further consideration of a clinical lead in this specific area. For newly diagnosed people with ME, CFS, FM, and long COVID, life suddenly becomes a minefield of information, misinformation, confusion, frustration, and helplessness. I've been there. It's an horrendous situation to be in. Sleeping Giants CIC have done a sterling job with this project, and I hope that you will be much more informed by the end of this webinar. We have several speakers lined up who will cover quite a range of subjects today. So without further ado, I will pass on to the very capable hands of Dr. Lorna Bell.
Thank you, Elaine. I will share my screen. If somebody perhaps could just nod when the technical functions have kicked in and you're seeing the slides. Yep, thumbs up, brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Elaine, for introducing me there and for inviting me along today. I'm Lorna Bell. I'm an independent researcher based in Dumfries and Galloway. I work with Sleeping Giants on a number of projects as an associate. And what that means in the context of this work is that Grace, Rebecca and the Sleeping Giants team carried out the consultation itself, then passed on the data and information to me for analysis. And I'm pleased to be here today to share some of the key findings and recommendations emerging from that work. So Just to give a bit of background, so the network asked Sleeping Giants to carry out consultation with local stakeholders as well as people with one or more of the conditions that are supported by the network. And the aim was to establish the need for and feasibility of the 3 project ideas which Elaine has just outlined. So this is them again here, just for the sake of completeness. So there was an idea around developing or identifying or recruiting a clinical leader champion, working with the NHS Dumfries and Galloway to do that, as well as an expert patient mentoring scheme, and also perhaps a volunteering befriending scheme. So that's what the consultation aimed to do, to find out views of current experiences of care across the Dumfries and Galloway and gain a better understanding of the need for these 3 project ideas. So what did they do? Well, there was 2 surveys, one for people from partner agencies and then a second one for people with one of the conditions, which I'll refer to hereafter as the lived experience survey. There was interviews with local stakeholders from health and social care services, as well as 5 focus groups, one of which was with people with lived experience and the other 4 were representatives from partner agencies. And there was also, Eileen mentioned, the network has several Facebook pages, and those were also used as a means to facilitate further discussion with the people with the conditions. So, and also just a bit of context before I introduce the findings. It's been mentioned that there's been some funding to enable this work that came from the Health and Social Care Alliance. And their approach to self-management has been used to inform some of the questions that were asked in the consultation. And by self-management, that's not obviously about people being left on their own, but how they can work in partnership with health and social care professionals to be better informed, better prepared and better supported. And way back in 2008, I believe, they produced a long-term condition strategy called GAN Yourself. And within that, there was 5 principles for self-management, and I've set these out here as these were asked, we asked in the surveys whether or not people delivering the services felt that they or their service were actually delivering each of these principles, or for those with a lived experience, whether they felt they were experiencing each of these principles when they access care. So for example, we've got one in the top right here about I am the leading partner in management of my health. So what did we find then? Excuse me. So key findings. So both surveys asked about those principles, and I'll start with the partner agency findings. So here we've got different shades of green, and the different shades of green indicate that the partner agency people that were completing the survey felt that their service was delivering each of these conditions at least some of the time, either often, sometimes, or always. And the little slither of orange in the middle there is seldom. So overall, it's quite positive, isn't it? There's a lot of green there, which suggests that the services felt that they were delivering these principles at least some of the time. But if we look at how people with lived experience answered this question, a similar question, it looks a bit more colourful. So we've got a salmon pinky colour here coming in here, and that means that they never felt they experienced it. So if we start down at the bottom, it starts off relatively positively, where most felt that they were experiencing, I am a leading partner in the management of my care at least some of the time. But as we move to the top, far fewer were feeling that when they're asked by services about their care and support, questions value my experience and focus on more than just my medical and financial aspects of my life. So there's a really interesting contrast there between the 2 different perspectives. Of course, like any survey, we're never quite sure why, what motivates somebody to complete the survey. And it may be that those completing the partner agent survey were those that were most engaged with these principles and ideas. And conversely, those completing the lived experience survey could be those that were most dissatisfied with their experience of care. We just don't know. But the remainder of the findings also presented a mixed experience, or more often a negative experience amongst those with lived experience of the care and support available to them. So almost all felt that there was a stigma surrounding people with ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia or long COVID, and over half felt that they were unsupported by the services in the management of their condition. And these are a few of the quotes that I've pulled out to illustrate the types of things that people were saying in the survey. And in general, there was a sense that they just didn't feel believed or taken seriously, or because they didn't appear unwell physically to look at, that the people just didn't understand the different symptoms that they were experiencing. And we also asked in the survey if people experienced any barriers to accessing services, and this table here shows the different things and issues that we were asked if they experienced when trying to, or acted as a barrier when they were trying to access a service. Of course, I live in Langham, so I'm well aware of the geographical issues in reaching different parts of the region. And as you would expect in a region like this, geographical location was making it difficult for around 11 and transport for 7 people to access services. But the one that came up top was confidence. 20 people out of the 53 that answered the survey felt that their confidence was an issue in accessing service. And bear in mind, if we think back to what the project ideas were around perhaps needing expert patients to help people to help and support people with a condition, it does make you wonder perhaps that this demonstrates a real need perhaps for that service. But moving on to the project ideas then. So there was 3 project ideas. We had the clinical lead, the expert patient mentors, and the befriending scheme. So both the partner agency survey and the lived experience survey asked both groups if they felt it would be useful or helpful in the case of the lived experience survey. And we can see again, there's a lot of green here. So support overall for all 3 ideas was high. Amongst partner agencies, it was slightly higher for those setting up a befriending scheme, but there's really not much in it. And then if we go into the lived experience survey, we can see that support there in terms of which idea they felt would be helpful for people with a condition. It was the clinical lead. So within the focus groups in particular, there was further discussion of what that implementation might look like, and there was a number of challenges that were identified. So in relation to a clinical lead, there was lots of discussion about, well, where would that sit? And a wide range of different services were identified, but it was felt that it was important that wherever it goes, where that person might sit, that they are appropriately embedded within the structures and systems of the organisation. There was also concern about it would be difficult to create a role in the absence of a coordinated or structured approach to the management of the conditions, which is another thing to consider as the network moves forward with their ideas. In relation to the expert patients, there was a strong feeling amongst the different stakeholders consulted that any expert patient mentors would need to be appropriately trained and supported to ensure that they were giving out the most accurate and up-to-date information to the people that they were supported, but also in recognition that these people themselves would be experiencing the conditions, that there would need to be sufficient backup within the system to allow for fluctuations in their conditions. There's also a part that actually for some people the timing of the availability of the support was also important. So for those perhaps that have been diagnosed for a longer period of time, felt that there would be less need than for somebody that had been newly diagnosed. So ensuring that the right information and support is available at the right time is something to consider as we move forward with the project ideas. So some final thoughts and recommendations on the basis of this, that the consultation has provided some valuable insight into perceptions and experiences of the services, and in doing so, given that the network a good evidence base upon which they can take the project plans forward. The one thing that struck me as somebody that was brought in to do the analysis of the data set was that change is needed in the care and support available to people with the conditions. And although that change cannot be brought about by the network alone, there's obviously scope for it to continue working in partnership with key regional stakeholders to ensure to raise awareness of what's needed. And obviously given the potential role of a clinical lead, that's something that can be considered as they continue with this work. The second point here relates to the fact that so many of the people with lived experience felt that they weren't believed, or that there was a stigma around their condition. So that suggests that there's a real need to continue raising awareness and understanding of the conditions to ensure that that can be addressed and tackled. But another thing that came out was that friends and family was the most commonly accessed source of support at every stage of the conditions. So given the importance of the family and friend, I think there's certainly a need to consider how they can be engaged moving forward to ensure that both they're able to support the person in the family with the condition, but also have the support that they need themselves to fulfil that role. There's also, given that confidence emerged as a real issue for some of the people with lived experience in accessing care, there's a potential role for the network as well as the expert patient mentors to work towards increasing the confidence of people with a condition to help them navigate health and social care. And as probably most researchers do, I think a key next step really is to recommend that further consultation is carried out to help develop the scope of each of these project ideas, taking into consider the emerging national and local policy context and the development as they do so. And within that, I'm thinking of the national with the new ME CFS NICE guidelines were just updated last year, and obviously within more locally within Dumfries and Galloway there's the strategic commissioning plan which sets out the commissioning intentions for the region, which again all this work needs to be set in the context of as they move forward. So that's a whistle stop tour, if you like, of the different key findings emerging from the report. As a guest, I don't think I have access to the chat function, so I'm not sure if there's much going on there or if there's even indeed time for me to answer a few questions at this stage, but I'll be quiet for a moment and pass back to you.
Thanks very much, Lorna, and welcome again, everyone. My name is Grace Cardozo. I'm the Managing Director of Sleeping Giants, who, as Lorna has outlined and Eileen has outlined, we were the organisation who were commissioned to undertake the consultation on behalf of Dumfries and Galloway ME and Fibromyalgia Network. We have got maybe a couple of minutes, Lorna, for questions, if that's okay. I noticed that our next speaker, Dr. Shepherd, has just arrived. That's great timing, Dr. Shepherd. But I think we'll be able to kind of pause for just a moment and take a couple of questions. I'm not sure that everybody can see the chat, as is the nature of Teams sometimes. So if anybody does have any questions for Lorna in relation to the consultation findings, maybe just raise your hand at this point. Any questions for Lorna? So we will, of course, be sending out the full report. If you haven't received that already, we'll be following up today's event with some more information and links, etc. But I think the key thing, I suppose, for us is to ensure that this report is not something that sits on a shelf and was a nice piece of work to be undertaken. You know, there was a lot of really helpful feedback, both from individuals with lived experience, but also really critically partners across the health and social care partnership in terms of some of the barriers and enablers that they face as well in supporting this particular patient group. So it would be great if people can, you know, take the report back to your particular services and continue the conversations about the findings through there. The ME and Fibromyalgia Network will, of course, be using all of this information from the report to develop their own strategic and operational plans and their plans moving forward. But that certainly can't be done in isolation, and it's really important that the Health and Social Care Partnership and those around those networks are really highly involved. And for any of you who were involved in the consultation, really grateful for your feedback, whether that was through a survey or a focus group or a one-to-one interview. It was great to get so much really rich information and data there. So we'll have another opportunity to kind of ask some questions at the end. Lorna will have to jet off just before 3 o'clock. So, but if there are any questions that come to mind about the consultation that people want to ask, then please do let us know them, and we can certainly kind of answer those offline as well. But Without further ado, I'd really like to welcome our next speaker. We're delighted to have Dr. Shepherd, Dr. Charles Shepherd, who's the medical advisor for the ME Association, who's going to come and talk to us a little bit more about the NICE guidelines, which have recently been revised. I understand. I'm sure that many of us might be aware of that, but not all of us might have had the opportunity yet to kind of really update ourselves with the detail of that. So again, thanks very much, and a very warm welcome to you, Dr. Shepherd.
Thank you, Grace. First of all, has everyone had a copy, or do they have access to the copy of the handout that I prepared and sent to you, Grace?
Yes, that's been circulated to everybody.
That's been circulated. So some people have got hold of it, some people may not have it here. But what I'm going to do is sort of go through parts of it in my little presentation here, and that anyone who hasn't got hold of it then can get hold of it via your website or whatever. Okay, that's absolutely fine. Right, so I think I've got about half an hour for this talk, haven't I? And I thought I would spend about sort of quarter of an hour to 20 minutes just talking through about the NICE guideline, NICE guidelines in general, and how NICE guidelines apply or might apply to people in Scotland, and then take questions for 10 minutes or so at the end. By strange coincidence, I've just come from doing a radio interview for BBC Radio Ulster, over in Northern Ireland, obviously, on the problems that people in Northern Ireland have with lack of referral services, which almost mirrors the situation in Scotland, because in Northern Ireland at the moment there are currently no multidisciplinary or clinician-led hospital-based referral services for people with ME who require, or their GPs require, more help with diagnosis and management. And so clearly that is a very serious omission. And I'm aware of the situation in Scotland, or I think reasonably aware of the situation in Scotland, where things are really not much better. So to kick off with just a few words about NICE guidelines in general. I was obviously asked to talk about this in Northern Ireland because NICE guidelines, although are primarily prepared now that we have devolved government as far as health is concerned, they're primarily prepared for use in England, but they do apply in Northern Ireland and Wales. They do not apply in that way in Scotland. Scotland, as I'm sure you're probably already aware, and I helped Gregor Purdy with the initial preparation of the Scottish Good Practice Statement on ME/CFS, is the current guidance on this condition in Scotland. The Scottish Good Practice Statement, I think, was finalised and published in 2010, although it was a far better document than the 2007 NICE guideline, it does need a considerable update. And I don't know whether anyone here has been involved in this consultation, but I understand from Ewan Dale, our trustee in Scotland, that a consultation process has been put in place by NHS Scotland as to whether NHS Scotland should adopt the new NICE guideline, or whether it should prepare a new guideline or update the Scottish Good Practice Statement. Preparing a new guideline under the SIGN system would be a long time-consuming process. I mean, that would be another 2 or 3 years possibly down the line before you get a new guideline. So I think it is looking quite likely that Scotland is going to adopt the new NICE guideline. So I'm going to sort of base my talk on the basis that I hope it's going to produce this new guideline, because I think it is a major step forward in the clinical care of people with ME in relation to both diagnosis and management. So just a few more brief words on what NICE guidelines are. So NICE guidelines provide guidance, that's what it is, to health professionals in general practice and in hospital-based medicine and all health professionals, not just doctors. So it applies to physios, occupational therapists, and also social care, people involved in social care. It is guidance, so doctors can deviate from what is in a NICE guideline. They can still use their clinical judgment. So they can still prescribe things which are not in the NICE guideline. But if the NICE guideline says do not do something, which this one is now quite specific in relation to graded exercise therapy, if a doc decides to go off and use his clinical or her clinical judgment to go and do something like recommended graded exercise, and a patient then suffers harm as a result of that, the doctor is putting themselves in a very difficult position from the point of view of medico-legal situation. And if someone comes to harm by a doctor doing something that is not recommended in a NICE guideline, then they could be in serious trouble. So I think things like the removal of graded exercise from this guideline is a very important step forward. And I would be very surprised, certainly where the guideline is in force, if anyone is now being recommended to have graded exercise. The guidelines produce an awful lot of bullet point recommendations. They're mostly positive recommendations, but as I say, there are some do nots, like do not use graded exercise, do not recommend lightning process, but they're mostly positive recommendations. The NICE produce huge numbers of guidelines. I think they've got about 400 guidelines. They take an awful long time to prepare. This was actually a totally new guideline. It wasn't a revision of the old guideline, so it's totally new territory. It took us over 3 years to do this, and I think, having prepared this, we are now going to live with a guideline for probably about 10 years. So it's not going to get changed unless something dramatic happens in the way of research which changes management for this condition. Just a brief word on how we actually produced this guideline, because I was a member of the guideline committee that did this. So what the committee did was to review basically all the evidence that we could find relating to both diagnosis and management. And in relation to treatment of ME/CFS, what we did was we looked at all the clinical trials that have been published in the journals. So they were all very carefully and independently reviewed using something called the grade system. We heard from experts. We heard from patients. We took patient evidence. We took charity evidence on the efficacy and safety of various treatments. And you may be aware, you may have even taken part in it, the Forward ME group of charities prepared a large survey which was independently analysed by academics at Oxford University, Oxford Brookes University, which took patient evidence on the safety and efficacy of CBT, graded exercise and pacing. So that was all that evidence was fed into the committee to help them make their decisions on which treatments could be recommended and which could not. And what was particularly disappointing, from one thing that I found particularly disappointing about this review, and it was a very thorough review of the clinical trials, was that when we looked at all these clinical trials, and this was not just CBT and graded exercise, but it was the whole treatment, drug treatment, supplements, vitamins, everything under the sun that's been done, we could not find a single clinical trial that we could rate of being of high quality. The vast majority of, in fact, I think probably almost 100% of the clinical trials that we looked at using this grade system came out as being of low or very low quality. So that is a very disappointing verdict on what is probably over 20, 30 years, millions of pounds of money being spent on clinical trials, which turned out to be of very low quality or low quality. And that's a very disappointing conclusion. So we had to conclude, as far as treatments for ME/CFS, whether it's drug treatments, dietary treatments, behavioural treatments, we don't have a safe and effective treatment for this condition at the moment. But what we do have is quite a lot of things that we can do from the point of view of management to help people live with this disease. So that in particular relates to symptomatic management And where we spent a lot of time, obviously, was on activity and energy management, the removal of graded exercise therapy, and the recommendations on activity and energy management, which are largely based on a pacing approach to management. So if I just take you through what I think are the key recommendations in this report, and you probably need to either go and look at the full report to chase this up further. I've put on the handout here, but you can go to our website and access it. The ME Association, I've prepared a sort of mini guide to the NICE guideline. NICE guideline itself is about 87 pages long, and so I've done a sort of 20-page mini guide to pick out the key points from it. But if I pick out the really key points from it, first of all, there's a section which is totally new, which I spent a lot of time persuading NICE ought to go in, that we needed to have something on what it got titled as suspecting ME/CFS and diagnosing ME/CFS. So what to do in that stage when you've got someone who's been perfectly well, as many people with this illness are, who gets an infection, is not recovering from it, and the diagnosis of ME/CFS is being queried over a period of weeks and months, and possibly someone being labelled with having a post-viral fatigue syndrome in the very early stages. So there's a lot of good stuff there on what you do with someone who's previously well, gets an infection and is not recovering from it, but has not yet got a diagnosis of ME/CFS. And of course, the key things there are something which has gone out of fashion in medicine is a period of rest and convalescence, and hopefully some sort of gradual return to normal activities, and maybe not even going on to get a diagnosis of ME, and addressing things like pain and sleep disturbance and whatever. So there's an expectation that the possibility of ME/CFS is raised very, very early on. We are recommending very clearly that where people have a straightforward history to this illness of infection, not recovering, that where they have this classic collection of ME/CFS symptoms, which we list very specifically, the Institute of Medicine report diagnostic criteria, basically. So it's debilitating fatigue, cognitive dysfunction, unrefreshing sleep, orthostatic intolerance, and the autonomic nervous system dysfunction symptoms, POTS, orthostatic intolerance, and then post-exertional malaise, post-exertional symptom exacerbation. Where someone presents with those symptoms following an infection at 3 months, if there's no other explanation for those symptoms, then a diagnosis of ME should either be made or seriously considered. And at that point, people should then, and I'm saying that everyone with this diagnosis, whether it's adults, children, or adolescents, should then be referred on to a specialist referral team or service for confirmation of that diagnosis and expert advice on all aspects of management. And that is, I think, in areas such as Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, where there are either no services existing at the moment or virtually no services, referral services existing at the moment, commissioners are now under a duty to provide such a service. And this was something I was going into Northern Ireland this morning. I've gone into it with people in Wales. And incidentally, it's on our website. It will be on our website later today. I know it's on our Facebook page. What's called an implementation statement has been issued by NICE today, which is giving further clear guidance to health commissioners and service providers on what they should be doing in relation to either repositioning current services, which require changes in the way that people are managed, or setting up new services where no services exist. And there is a very clear section, it's on the handout, in the NICE guideline, which we put in a box, of what a specialist team should consist of. It says a specialist team, it's a specialist referral service, should consist of a range of healthcare professionals trained and experienced in assessing, diagnosing, treating and managing ME/CFS. They commonly have medically trained clinicians from a variety of specialties, including rheumatology, endocrinology, infectious diseases, neurology, as well as access to other healthcare professionals specializing in ME/CFS, and they may include dietitians, occupational therapists, dietitians, counselling psychologists, etc. So it is very clear what this specialist team should be made up of, and the fact that people should be having access to this specialist team. Once they get to see a specialist team, in theory, hopefully, then an important part of the management process should be providing the patient and their GP with an agreed care and support plan of management, and this should be followed up by regular reviews in primary care, and we specifically state that people with ME should have a review every year and every 6 months for children. So that's, in theory, what should be happening. It's a big ask in many situations, and as we know, in Scotland, it's a tremendous ask, but it's something that people should be having. And I think it's a very powerful tool for you now, if you want to go off and do this, to campaign on with health boards and politicians to get these services going in Scotland. The other, I suppose, subdivision of what else we recommended in this report, there's a very detailed section on activity and energy management, as I already mentioned, and this is all based on pacing. There is a section which I did have some concerns about, particularly some of the use of the nomenclature in it, but there's a section on energy and activity and exercise management for people who are recovering. And although we, I think, are very specific in what we say in that section as to what should be happening, I'm not happy with the terminology of some of the headings in that section. But otherwise, the activity and exercise, the activity and energy management section is really pretty good. Other aspects of management in the report, which again I think we've done a pretty good job on. There is a good section on safeguarding issues relating to children to hopefully prevent unnecessary referrals to child protection agencies. There is a big section now on people with severe and very severe ME/CFS, including the provision of domiciliary home visiting services, what should happen if people with ME/CFS at severe end of spectrum go into hospital, and really a very clear message that health professionals both in primary care and in hospital-based medicine can no longer ignore the needs of people with severe ME. There's a section on aids and adaptions and making it very clear that people with severe ME should be able to have aids and adaptions like blue badges or mobility aids, wheelchairs, etc. There is reference to social care referrals, because we know that there's a tremendous problem with getting social care for people with ME. There is some information on education, employment, diet and nutrition. So that's really the key points, I think, within the guideline. And then the challenge now is to get this guideline, certainly in England, implemented. And by that, I mean getting existing services to change what they do. And there it's a pretty mixed picture at the moment. We've got some services who are embracing the new guideline and changing what they do. Really, it's really encouraging to hear and see what is going on. And there are others who are rather more reluctant to take on board the fact that graded exercise has been removed and CBT has been downgraded. So there are quite a lot of challenges ahead. I think there are still, objections and hostility even from some people within the Royal Colleges to the guideline. Some of our clinical commissioning groups are moving far slower than they ought to be. So it is a very mixed picture. But as I say, there are other areas where there's a lot of encouraging signs. we have new, they're not large in number at the moment, but there are signs that new services are being created where none currently exist. One particular example that we're involved with at the moment and giving a lot of help to is the Isle of Man, which is geographically and politically rather unusual situation. But the Isle of Man government has ring-fenced, it's around about £500,000 to set up, actually in the Isle of Man, it's a joint ME/CFS and long COVID service. And the appointments are now being made to staff that service. So that is an interesting template, and there is someone on the Isle of Man, Juan, who's helped coordinate a lot of this activity, whom I know is very keen to help other groups who may wish to get some information from him on what to do. And the final thing is this whole issue, which we highlighted again in the report, is the necessity for education and training of health and social care professionals on the subject of ME, where obviously there is a considerable lack of knowledge at the moment. And we have been involved with trying to develop various sort of things around this. So there is the MEA guide to the NICE guideline. We can supply paper copies of that to GPs if they don't want to sort of go through the bother of trying to download a NICE guideline. We've just published, or we're publishing it tomorrow, a new MEA booklet on covering the whole subject of early and accurate diagnosis of ME/CFS in some detail. We have a new edition of the MEA Purple booklet, which is it's about 150 pages and covers everything to do with research, diagnosis, management in considerable detail. That is free to health professionals. We have an education budget at the MEA to send copies of those out to anyone who wants one. So that's a brand new edition of that, dated April 2022. And then I put on here on the handout some details of some learning modules. There is a learning module for GPs on the NICE guideline, which is pretty good, produced by MIMS, so they can get a 1-hour credit for their General Medical Council appraisal portfolio by completing that module. And Dr. David Strain, my colleague over at AFME, has done a learning module on the new guideline for publication called Guidelines in Practice. And again, if a GP reads through that, he will know all about the NICE guideline, and he'll get a 1 credit for his GMC appraisal in the process as well. So there's quite a lot of learning materials being developed to help push what is in the NICE guideline. And the other thing we're doing is at Forward ME, that's the group of charities that meet together. It used to be under the auspices of the Countess of Mar, but it's now we've now Margaret Marr's retired from the House of Lords. We have a new chairman. We are meeting with representatives to start with from the Royal College of General Practitioners in June to discuss how the new guideline can be implemented in primary care in general practice. So there's a lot going on to implement these guidelines. It is patchy. There's a lot of work to do, but I think, the tool is there to do something really at long last to really improve diagnosis and management of this condition. I'm looking at my watch. I think I've done my about 20 minutes as promised, so I'm going to leave about 10 minutes for questions, discussion. Yep, far away.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Shepherd. That was a really comprehensive and full outline of the new guidelines. And I'm sure many of the people with lived experience around the table today will be delighted to hear a bit more detail about what's in the guidelines. And it sounds like if implemented robustly, there's quite a lot of potential solutions to some of the issues that people have been raising within the consultation survey. We've got a couple of questions in the chat, and then I'll open it to the room. So the first one is, could you just talk a wee bit more about what the new guidelines say about CBT and whether they recommend as a useful treatment for ME and CFS, first of all?
Right, I mean, that's a good question, because CBT, CBT involved a great deal of discussion within the guideline committee. And if I just go back to the makeup of the guideline committee, as people may be aware, this was a committee made up of, I think, 21 people in all, and it was covered the whole spectrum of views on this illness. So we had people who were much more in the biopsychosocial mode and people who were in the biomedical mode. And the aim was, and we had to do this, we had to reach consensus on a whole range of difficult issues. And at the end of the day, I was really quite surprised at what level of consensus we reached. So if you recall, probably not recall because this is small print detail, when the first guideline draft that went out for sort of stakeholder and public consultation went out in November 2020, CBT had been, if you like, severely downgraded and was there as no longer recommended as a treatment. And that produced a lot of stakeholder consultation discussion. And so that recommendation was changed to downgrading CBT to not as a treatment for the underlying condition. So it is very clear that CBT cannot now be used as a treatment for ME on the basis that you've got abnormal beliefs, abnormal behaviors, deconditioning, everything else, and it's all psychological. That is very clear. You can't have CBT, or CBT is not recommended for that. Where I think we got the guideline right, and I don't have any particular problem with this, is that as with any other long-term medical condition, some people sometimes find CBT helpful in coping with the emotional distress of, just living with a long-term illness like this, which is having such a negative impact on so many aspects of your life. And talking to a sympathetic therapist about the way your emotions are being affected by an illness like this is fine for some people, and it may be helpful. Where I personally disagreed with the conclusion in the final part of the final version of the guideline on CBT was the recommendation that CBT can help people sometimes cope with symptoms of ME/CFS, and I disagreed personally with this because the evidence is actually not there that CBT can actually improve symptoms such as pain or fatigue. It may help you deal with the symptoms or live with those symptoms, but actually as a treatment for those symptoms, the evidence is not there. So I would disagree with that. So the bottom line at the end of the day was CBT remains as a treatment option. It is something that should not be forced or coerced a patient into. It should be discussed with the patient if they want to have CBT. It may be helpful for psychological distress. NICE thinks it may be helpful for treating symptoms, which I would disagree with. And if it is going to be used, then it must be delivered by a CBT therapist who has been properly trained and educated in ME, and not hived off to some CBT therapist who's not normally dealing with people with ME, who may still be in the dim and distant past thinking that this is all abnormal illness beliefs.
That's really helpful, thank you. That's a really important distinction, isn't it, in terms of when and how CBT should be offered and applied. That's really helpful.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing with the CBT is, because I mean, we know that some of the services in England are led by the lead clinician is a CBT therapist, and I would hope that would disappear, and that this notion that you get your referral to the referral service, and the first thing that then happens is you go off and see a CBT therapist. That is not what we want to be happening.
Absolutely, thank you. Eileen, before I come to your second question in the chat, I'll just open to other questions from the floor, if that's okay, because I'm not sure everybody can access the chat equally. So anyone want to raise their hands if they have a question for Dr. Shepherd about anything that he's talked about today? Clark, I think that is it?
It is, guys. It is. How are you?
Hi.
Hi,
So
Dr.
I'm just
Shepherd.
reading your
Yes,
name. You're Clark Adams. You're from, that's great, NHS Dumfries and Galloway.
I am.
I am. So do you know Gregor then? Gregor Purdy. Gregor Purdy?
I know
Dr.
of him.
Purdy?
I know of him. Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, Dr. Shepherd. Thanks very much for your time. It's most encouraging. I'm just thinking, as a nurse myself who has got ME, how are they doing the preventative approach within England, and can everybody refer sort of from like your community nurses, your podiatrists, your GPs, who sort of, is it like a all-inclusive staff who can refer into the specialist referral service? I understand what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, at present, most of the referral services in England have a pretty sort of standard. I mean, it's fairly standard throughout, but they have their individual variations. But they have a protocol. I mean, I think I'd probably be right in saying that it's really got to be a GP referral
Right.
onwards. So there's a fairly standard protocol that the GP, a sort of tick box protocol that the GP does before they will accept a person as a referral.
Right.
I mean, one of the areas where this has got to change is that some say, you know, have they had symptoms for 6 months, because that's the research criteria, but we're now saying 3 months you referred on. So I mean, the other thing which they're tend to be pretty strict on, and is fairly sensible, is saying before they're referred on, have they had all the routine basic blood tests done? So have they been checked for celiac disease, thyroid disease, kidney disease, etc., etc. So providing that they, you know, the tick box is there to try and cut down on unnecessary referrals and people who possibly got some other reason for their chronic fatigue, ME type symptoms. Providing that is completed, then it's a GP referral, I think.
Okay. Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dr. Shepherd and Clark, for that question. I'm not sure if guests can also access the reactions button to raise your hand. So if there's anyone else in the room who has a question and can't raise your hand or pop that in the chat, then feel free to unmute yourself and holler at this point. Otherwise, we'll go to the other question in the chat. Anyone? Okay, also I'll ask the final question on the chat, Dr. Shepherd, which is just, will these guidelines around kind of diagnosis, etc., also be used with regards to long COVID diagnosis, given that long COVID is essentially a post-viral syndrome, potentially very similar to ME?
I suspect the answer is really no, because first of all, long COVID has its own nice guideline, which I think needs to be improved, but we won't go into that. I've got a big interest in the overlap between long COVID and ME/CFS, and I think the bottom line here is that most people, but not all, most people with long COVID have got some ME/CFS type symptoms. In some cases, they've got the whole gamut of ME type symptoms. They've got brain fog, they've got debilitating fatigue, unrefreshing sleep, post-exertional malaise, POTS, orthostatic intolerance. They've got the whole lot. And that there are a minority of people with long COVID who have got all these ME/CFS type symptoms, whose COVID specific type symptoms have disappeared. In other words, they're no longer breathless, their taste and smell has returned. As far as one can tell from standard tests, there's nothing wrong with their lungs. Their chest x-rays are all right, and even more complex investigation of lung function is normal, and they are just left with basically ME/CFS type symptoms. And in that case, they really fulfill ME/CFS diagnostic criteria. So if you've got someone with long COVID who's got ME/CFS like symptoms and doesn't have any COVID lung, smell, taste, heart problems continuing from the COVID, you know, they can, and I think probably should, be just diagnosed as having post-COVID ME/CFS. I mean, as we pointed out, we've been involved in this since May 2020. It comes as no surprise to find that there are people with COVID who are developing ME/CFS or ME/CFS-like symptoms, because it's happened with SARS and MERS, these other you know, COVID-type epidemics which occurred 10, 15 years ago. It's nothing new. And interestingly enough, around about 10% of people with SARS and MERS were going on to develop an ME/CFS-like illness. So in some cases, long COVID is no different from ME/CFS, but in others, it's people who've got COVID-related symptoms plus ME/CFS symptoms.
That's great. Thanks very much indeed. And thanks again for your really comprehensive input there around the NICE guidelines, and also for the information that you sent in terms of the handout. I'm sure that will be really helpful for everyone in terms of referring back. We will send out that mini kind of guide that you talked about on the ME Association website, just to make sure people have got ease of access to that. And I'm sure you know, everyone would want to join with me in thanking you for coming along. Hopefully you can be our phone friend at some point if there's any other questions that we have to ask. I had to Google orthostatic intolerance just a minute ago to find out what that meant, but that's been hugely helpful. And I guess there's a bit of, you know, for those of our NHS and health and social care colleagues around the table, there's a bit of a challenge posted there really in terms of those duties that you talked about as response to the NICE guidelines in terms of that development of a specialist team. And you know, we always have problems in Dumfries and Galloway because of our ability to recruit and the infrastructure and rurality, etc., in terms of specialist teams. But I guess we need to be really clear about how we then refer patients and where they might be referred to a specialist team if we can't provide that locally. Because what we know from the ME and Fibromyalgia network is often it takes over a decade for their members to be diagnosed. And with that amount of time, that's 10 years that people are spending suffering with these really debilitating conditions on their own, which is not a situation that you know, can continue.
I will, and please let me know. Although I suspect I will hear from Ewan as well, obviously, our trustee in Glasgow, that, you know, what happens with this Scottish NHS consultation on the NICE guideline, and whether Scotland adopts the NICE guideline. My gut feeling is that Scotland will adopt the NICE guideline, and that you know, you will then, or not, they will then have to implement it. Yeah. Which should be good news, but you're going to have to prod them on the way.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you so much.
Right, I'm going to have to dash because I've got a whole pile of other things.
No worries. Thank you. And yeah, absolutely. You know, Chris posting in the chat there, definitely work for us all to do, especially regarding reablement and rehab provision, with ultimate recovery as the goal. Absolutely, Chris. So I see that Liz Forsyth has just landed. Liz, I hope you don't mind. We are going to take just a bit of a kind of 5-minute break at this point, just for people to refresh their brains, etc., a little bit. So please do take a wee 5-minute break. But I would ask people, if you wouldn't mind, to be back at 3:10 sharp. Liz, I'm sure you're having to jet off to other meetings and things like that. So if we can make sure that everyone's back at 3:10 sharp, that would be really helpful. Thank you. Okay, a warm welcome back, everyone. Hopefully everyone managed to get a quick break there for 5 minutes. It came to that time of the day where my small dog started barking furiously, which is why I ran away again for a second. But hopefully they'll be quiet now. I'd like to welcome Liz Forsyth, who is the Strategic Support Manager. I think I've got the right title, Liz. A very warm welcome to you. Liz was really instrumental in pulling together the strategic commissioning plan for Dumfries and Galloway. So it's great that Liz has come along today and is going to talk to us a little bit about how the work of the network might kind of dovetail with the strategic commissioning plan. And I suppose also for those of you who maybe don't know what the strategic commissioning plan is, Liz, I guess I'll outline that a little bit. So you're very welcome, Liz. We're delighted to have you along today.
Thanks, Grace. I'm going to share almost immediately my presentation, if I can get it up on the screen. I'm hoping I can. You see that, or is it flickering? Because it's flickering at my end.
It's not quite there yet, Liz. Just a sort of black screen.
I do have some issues with technology at the moment. We've got a few.
Rebecca, I think you might have a backup. Do you, Rebecca?
Yep. Do you want to try one more time, Liz? And if it doesn't work, I can share your slides.
That would be super. I'll try one more time. It just flickers, and it's very, very off-putting. No, it's flickering like mad. If you could put it up, Rebecca, that'd be much appreciated. Thank you.
No problem. And just let me know when you'd like me to change slides.
Grand, thank you. Okay, so as Grace said, and thank you for the introduction, Grace, I'm Liz Forsyth. I'm the Strategy Support Manager for NHS Dumfries and Galloway. Now it says Strategy Support Manager, that actually means General Dog's Body in Strategic Planning. It is a title which does not reflect the job that goes under it. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to thank everybody first and foremost for contributing to the development of the strategic commissioning plan. I could not have done it without the input of all the people that fed in to the engagement activities and the engagement work that we did during that time, and the ME Fibromyalgia network was one of those feed-in groups. So it is very much appreciated, because we couldn't produce a proper plan without having that input from yourselves. It's totally dependent on the input of people with lived experience to give us the right data. Next slide, please. Forward, I kind of see.
I think there might just be a wee delay between clicking through the slides.
So I'm representing Viv Gratian today. She's the Deputy Head of Strategic Planning, and she asked me to do a presentation mainly focusing on the model of health and social care and support that's embedded within the Strategic Commissioning Plan. So firstly, to illustrate how that model represents health and social care and support provision across all sectors and at all levels. And secondly, to show how the network and groups like it support the delivery of the model. Next slide, please.
Rebecca, I'm not sure if others are seeing what I'm seeing, but I'm still seeing the thank you slide.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I'm glad the technical issues are not just at my end. So that's the one, thanks. So as you can see in the model, the person is at the centre of their own health and social care and support. The layers of support are not on a set continuum, so those circles blend into one another. They're not like firm lines. We deliberately didn't put a boundary line on them. They can be accessed at any point from any direction. They are individual, but they're also linked to the needs and wants of the person at that time. So somebody's health may wax and wane. It may improve or decline over time. So it's important that people can do that. So for personal resources, just to clarify what these rings are, personal resources such as a person's own knowledge and behaviour are central to managing their own health and well-being. So this can include things like food choices, exercise, sleep, relationships. All those things can make somebody's health and well-being better or worse. And you may have more or less control over those things depending on your circumstances. The second ring, family, friends and unpaid carers, they have a very important role in supporting people, and where appropriate they should be involved in each circle of health and social care and support. We've tried to ensure that that's really embedded within the strategic commission intentions that are within the plan. And we appreciate that some people don't have family, friends and carers, so that is a ring that some people will not be able to access. The next one is community-based social supports, and it's a bit of an ambiguous line, but we threw it back and forward for ages, and there was nothing that really summed it up. There was no title that really summed up that big layer of people, because it covers opportunities to connect with other people and keep somebody involved in their community, be that a community of interest such as this group, or a geographical community. So these supports can reduce social isolation, loneliness, and help people maintain or improve their health and well-being. Community-based social supports like Food Train or Citizens Advice or Third Sector, Dumfries and Galloway support groups or day activities, they may be a person's first or second or last go-to support. For some people, they will come to their for instance, this network to explore, where they are, or to seek support at that time, or they may go straight to their GP, or they may go straight to their specialist if they have one. But conversely, some people may not want to engage with community-based social supports at all for a variety of reasons, and that of course is their choice, each to their own. The next one is non-residential health and social care. That layer of support can involve diagnosis, treatment, ongoing support from people with specialised health and social care knowledge. And it can happen in people's homes, communities, supporting them to stay safe and well and avoid them drifting into crisis. Non-residential health and social care can include community nursing, care at home provision, social work provision, mental health teams, community mental health teams, community learning disability nurses, and some of them will become part of the home teams model that's currently being developed. You may or may not know that is in the offing, but that's some of those things will be absorbed into those teams. Then you get to local hospitals and residential care. These are required when people have more intensive treatment care and support needs than can be supported at home. It may be a result of a crisis, a trauma, or deterioration of an existing condition. And again, this can be for a short or longer time, depending on how their health, how they react to that care and support. And then you get to out of region health and social care, which is sometimes necessary to achieve the best outcomes for people. We're working with colleagues at the moment across all sectors to reduce, where possible, the need for out of region health and social care. It doesn't appear to be anybody's ideal really, and we're continuing to strive to find solutions that enable people to stay closer to home if that's their preference, wherever possible. There are some specialist services, and just to thinking of one off the top of my head, like eating disorders, that really we just don't have the numbers of people that would justify a specialist service for that in this area. So sometimes people have to go out of area to get that really intensive residential support if needs be. Next slide, please. So I mentioned briefly there the strategic commission intentions. They are linked to the model, and these intentions and the tactical priorities that are linked to them will act as a framework for all work carried out across the partnership. Everything we do should fit under at least one of these. Many pieces of work will fit under multiple intentions, but ultimately the job is to deliver the model of care and support. For those of you that participated in the consultation process, you might remember that the original iteration of the SCP, Strategic Commissioning Plan, there was a Making It Happen section that had multiple actions and projects, quite operational detail in that section of the plan. But during the consultation feedback and subsequent meetings with partners, stakeholders pointed out that it was far too much information, it was way too complex, and it should be in a separate document. We took that section out of the plan, leaving only the headlines, and we're currently developing a partnership-wide delivery plan that has all that information and more in it. Next slide, please. So the delivery plan is currently a massive spreadsheet. I've been given a row for saying it's hideous, but it's not very inspiring. It's just a massive repository of data, but it brings together various work plans and projects from across the partnership, and everyone is checked against the strategic commission intentions, the national health and wellbeing outcomes, the equality outcomes, all these kind of things. It's really complex, but ultimately it's made up of 6 key components covering the sections that are shown on this slide here. So the delivery overview, what is being delivered, the accountability, who's responsible for delivering it, the impact assessment, is it accessible and inclusive, the outcomes, what will it do, the delivery against aim, did it do what it said it would do, and the finance, how much will it cost and how much did it cost. Next slide, please. And that is a whistle-stop tour of the of what the Strategic Commissioning Plan aims to do. If you've got any questions, fire away. If you're running out of time, then I'm happy to take them by email afterwards, and you can let me know.
Thanks so much for that, Liz. That was great. Really helpful to hear more about the Strategic Commissioning Plan, and I'm sure people can begin to already map the work of the network and how relevant it is from the conversations we've been having in terms of the stuff that you're talking about. And I guess for many members of the network, that community-based health and support round that you talked about is something that the network provides, where other services don't necessarily provide that at the moment. There's a couple of kind of comments in the chat that I want to maybe draw your attention to, but I also would like to open it up to questions first of all. So Chris says, totally agree with the model, Liz. The challenge at present, however, is that when the self-management and informal care options have been fully explored and exploited, our statutory response wrapping around those is limited, and meeting people's essential and immediate needs is an aspiration for many and not the reality. And I think that's a good point, Chris, and that ties back to what Dr. Shepherd was saying around the challenges of the new NICE guidelines, where there now is a duty for commissioners to consider how they provide access to a specialist team for ME in particular, which is what we were talking about here, but actually nothing like that at the moment exists in Dumfries and Galloway. And I just wanted to kind of maybe bring in Rosie's comment as well from a wee bit earlier, because I know not all of you can see the chat. So Rosie said, I have POTS as well as ME, and that also had to Google that, Rosie. So that's postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. I'm impressed with my pronunciation of that. I hope you all are. And she's outlining the fact that there's no specialist service for this in Scotland, never mind Dumfries and Galloway. And actually her GP had never heard of it until she was diagnosed by a cardiologist up at DGRI. So she was referred across the border to Manchester to see a specialist, that outward ring that you talked about, out of region support, but had to get board approval to refer to an English-run NHS service. But it is possible. So it does make her wonder whether people could be referred cross-border for ME specialist services, at least until Scotland puts together the specialist services and multidisciplinary health teams that the NICE guidelines are outlining are an essential part of care and support. So, Chris, I don't know, do you want to maybe come in and just, you know, say any more about your comment, first of all?
Yeah, no problem. Hi, Liz. Yeah, I think we're all, well, many of us are very familiar with the model and fully endorse it, but just through current experience, it's a combination of the COVID impact, a fractured social care system, a reduction in beds. We're conscious that when we've done all that work with families and carers around support, self-management, resilience, when that's all been fully, you know, explored, there's often very little left to offer, and even things just now like people not being given choice of where they might end up in a care home or the times of their care visits, etc., etc. So I think when we're going to present a model like this, we have to be very, very careful that when that centre has dried up, what else have we got to offer? So we're going to have to be quite creative, I think, how we deliver health and social care around our home teams in future to bear that in mind.
Liz. Come back, Grace.
Yeah.
I'm not a commissioner, unfortunately, so I don't have the insight into that to give you a good answer. I will feed this back, your comments, because I think all of them are absolutely valid, and I know what you're saying. With regards to the out of region support, I think it is a case of making sure you know your rights as patients, and speaking to the, what are they called? The patient feedback people. I'm pretty sure they've got a proper name, but I can't think.
Patient experience, Liz.
Patient experience, that's it. To see if there's anything that you can do to support that, and advocacy services as well. I think we are, because it's a small board, there are a lot of specialists that we just don't have here, and it may be that we need to consider that, whether it's in Scotland or over the border. But I don't know enough about it to give a a more full answer, and I wouldn't want to sort of waffle on about nothing. I think the fact that people are their experience does not match the model, I think it's that's a fair comment, and I would hope that as home teams get established that will be better. I can't guarantee it, but we're not really working on the at full capacity as yet. We're still coming out of the current situation that we've been in. So I don't know if we can really give a true reflection of how it's going to be. But as I say, I will feed these comments back to Viv, and she manages the commissioning managers. So hopefully she might be able to come back with a bit more of a firm answer for you, or reassurance at least.
That's really helpful, Liz. And I guess, you know, with any kind of model, it's an aspiration about a destination rather than, you know, recognising that there's a journey to get there, you know, rather than where we are necessarily at the moment. And with the NICE guidelines as well, you know, in a way, they are very similar. You know, the NICE guidelines for ME, it's where we aspire to be, a recognition that we're absolutely nowhere close to that at the moment. But at least if we've all got a common language, both people with lived experience and health and social care professionals, and we know where we want to get to, then you know, we can come together. But I think that was a really important point that you made as well, Liz, about patients and people with lived experience knowing their rights. And again, the NICE guidelines will be really helpful with that. And obviously the ME and Fibromyalgia Network have got a real you know, opportunity and role to help raise awareness amongst their members about their rights and experiences and needs. And then, you know, the critical bit is the coming together of both of those groups of people, the people with lived experience, health and social care professionals and commissioners, to look at how we really can work together to co-produce something for Dumfries and Galloway that is both meets the needs of people with lived experience, but also is realistic and doable in terms of the challenges we face as a rural board. So that's really helpful. Thank you. Liz, your hand's up.
Yeah, couple of things. I missed most of the talk about the NICE guidelines, but I am sure that that'll be on the horizon scanning for Viv and her team to make sure that we are doing what we need to do for that, because we do that periodically, and that will potentially go on the partnership delivery plan. The other thing I was going to say, which has gone out of my head now, no, it's gone. If I remember, I'll bring it back in. Sorry.
No worries, Liz. And we are recording this, and we had a really helpful input from Dr. Shepherd, who's the medical advisor for the ME Association, really going into detail about the NICE guidelines. So that's something that we'll share and can be passed on to the rest of the strategic planning team and other partners, that kind of need to know. Has anyone else got any questions for Liz? Again, either pop your hand up or holler if you don't have the function to pop your hand up at this stage, or pop any questions in the chat.
We've got a comment in the chat there, Grace.
Oh, perfect, thank you. So, so Wendy saying here, I think one of my concerns is someone who has long COVID and just at 2 years where symptoms have taken are increasing. I think I'm facing appointments with several consultant teams, all working independently rather than coordinated by one lead. And Wendy saying that she knows she's not the only one that's facing this. So I guess that's a big question, isn't it? About, we've got those circles around that model, Liz, but how do those circles work together effectively? And I guess even within some of those circles, how do the teams work together effectively? Any comments about that, either Liz or any of the other health and social care team members who are around the table today?
I think the aspiration is for people to communicate more with their colleagues and share information within, what we can. But it remains a challenge to share that between departments and to know who to speak to and who to share what with. But I think if one piece of advice I would perhaps give is for Wendy to say, look, I am happy for you to discuss my case with other people, and encourage them to do that, because at the end of the day, you're in charge of your health and the choices around your health and care. So if you feel as though working with other people would give you a more integrated, more coordinated, more collaborative journey, then I think that's within your gift to ask for that. And I've just remembered the other thing I was going to say was, I'm pretty sure, and I was trying to pull it up in the background, that one of the tactical priorities within the strategic commissioning plan, and you'll be flabbergasted to know that I don't know them off by heart, but I'm sure one of the things, one of the tactical priorities is about strategic commissioning intention 3, people and communities are enabled to self-manage and supported to be more resilient. The tactical priority, one of those 3.2, is that health and social care and support is designed, planned and delivered collaboratively, and that includes the person who's directly affected, and also that on Sky 5, people's care and support is safe, effective and sustainable. It does say the strategic commissioning cycle supports the sustainability. That's another one I wanted, but it's about sustaining that model of care. So we do need to make sure that we're doing it in conjunction with other people, not just as a strategic planning department or under a particular programme board or whatever.
Thanks very much for that, Liz, and thanks for your comment in the chat as well, Wendy. Paul, you have your hand up.
Yes, I just from what you were saying there and from the previous comment, it was my understanding that the construction of home teams was intended that the collaboration and, well, it centres on the person, that the work centres on the person, and that the communication between the different practitioners or professionals, whoever might be involved in a person's support and care, be it from health or social care, would all centre in on somebody perhaps who's the link worker within the home team for that person. Am I mistaken with that?
No, that is my understanding as well, Paul. But it's not to say that the specialists that are supporting Wendy would be part of the home team.
Yeah, and I guess it's important to kind of acknowledge that home teams are also a work in progress and a destination rather than something that we're necessarily fully formed, fully functioning at this point. But it feels like there's lots of really important developments coming around about the same time, which might help support the work that the network and the health and social care professionals are doing to support people with ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, long COVID, etc. It's really kind of going back to what you were talking about, though, Wendy. It's how all of that sort of stuff is brought together. I guess both at a strategic level in terms of how services are designed and how people's voices are fed into that and how we co-produce all of the solutions at a strategic level, but also really importantly at a kind of patient level where individuals with their own care are supported in a joined up and coordinated way. It can be, and I know it can feel quite difficult to get a voice about your care and support sometimes, or it can feel that way, particularly if you're dealing with a lot of teams. So maybe it's just useful to point out the Care Opinion website at this point, which is for health and social care feedback. And the patient experience team that we talked about before are the folk that will initially pick that up, and that will be immediately relayed to the various teams that might be involved in your care. So it is a really good way to draw attention to any experiences that you have, good or bad, with health and social care services, and it is something that will be responded to. So just we can also potentially send a link out to Care Experience to help with that. And then I'm just having a look at Wendy saying she's particularly talking about hospital consultant teams, so cardiology, ENT, for example, to identify too. And so, yeah, I mean, if that's not working particularly effectively in one building, then how necessarily is it going to work effectively across the patch? So, like what Chris said before, we've got work to do, but I guess that there's important steps that all of us can take from both sides. And that important bit about how we come together in the middle to help push things forward is really important. Does anyone else have any final questions for Liz before we let her run away to that hideous spreadsheet that she was talking about and the delivery of all of this? Anyone get any final questions? No, okay. So Liz, thank you so much indeed for your input today. It would be great, I think, if you're able to kind of feed back to Viv and others at the strategic planning team about today. And again, we'll share the recording so people can kind of pick up on that. There'll be also some really useful resources that we'll share, not least from the ME Association, around some of those kind of quick guides to the NICE guidelines, etc. But if I can just say thanks very much again for coming along today, it's most appreciated.
Thanks very much. Take care, everybody.
Thanks. Okay, folks, so we don't have very long left for our session today, but I just wanted to have the opportunity, if anyone's got any kind of final questions that they would like to ask. Now, that could be not necessarily for our speakers who, obviously are all really busy people and having to jet in and out, but if anyone has any questions potentially for the network, then I'm sure members of the network would be quite happy to answer that, or any questions for us at Sleeping Giants, then please do give us a shout or put something in the chat. Whilst you're maybe thinking about some questions, I'll just remind people and make a couple of summary comments, I suppose, about today. I think it's been really, really helpful today to hear, both kind of all of the contexts really that are really important for people living with ME, CFS, fibromyalgia and long COVID. you know, we have the NICE guidelines. Those feel really important. And I guess for those of you who are health and social care professionals, we would really love it, again, if you went back and shared within your teams what you've learned today, did a bit more digging about in terms of the NICE guidelines. We'll send that information out, and, you know, had a think about how your teams and the system as a whole, I suppose, can respond to the feedback within the consultation report, but also the guidelines. I think that would be really important. The network are always open to visitors and speakers and making those positive links, and so please do get in touch with the network if you want to kind of have more close working links, and we'll certainly be you know, looking at how we use the feedback to make sure we're having those really important discussions with some of the key people that we need to across the health and social care partnership. Again, just to remind people about the various things that Eileen talked about at the beginning. So if you haven't liked the Facebook page, there's a public Facebook page, please do like that. If you yourself are someone with lived experience, you can tap into the closed Facebook groups that the network provide around health info, arts and crafts, a general place just to touch base with people, each other, and to chat. Do have a look at the website, which is really comprehensive. You'll find lots of really useful information on the DGMEFM website, including lots of past newsletters, etc., and also materials and leaflets, etc., that you can share across your workplace with patients and other colleagues. We'll send kind of links and all that to these sorts of things. So that would be really, really helpful. In terms of the network itself, it's a charity that's been around for many years, but it's also a charity that's only really just had public funding, etc. So they themselves are going through a period of change and growth at the moment that Sleeping Giants are supporting them with. They recently had a new development worker part-time in post, and as you'll seen from the consultation, there's real aspirations in terms of some of these projects. So a big one is about how that kind of clinical leadership that we heard about in the NICE guidelines is pushed forward, and how the network can help support that, not just within one discipline, but those kind of multidisciplinary teams. So that will be a real focus for the network moving forward, is working in partnership with the Health and Social Care partnership. Also the befriending scheme, to make sure volunteer-led befriending, to make sure that people feel less isolated with these conditions, which many people do feel very isolated, not believed, unsupported, etc. So that's really important. The volunteer scheme, I think the befriending will be open to allies as well as people who themselves have lived experience. So if anyone wants to volunteer for that, that's absolutely great. And then the other really important bit, which may not end up being called expert patient mentoring, but what we really are meaning by that is people themselves with lived experience who can help others, particularly at key times, diagnosis, flare-ups, etc., self-manage their conditions. But it's really important that scheme moving forward, which again will be led by volunteers, is coordinated with the advice and the correct advice and guidance that's been given out by the NICE guidelines and by health and social care professionals as well, so that the messaging and the support complements one another. So again, look out for that too. But it would be, I'm just going to pause at that point and say, to see if anyone has any final questions before I pass over to Eileen just for a very brief word of thanks. Any questions then that people are left with after today's event? Again, feel free to holler, pop your hand up, pop it in the chat. Selena, I think, yeah, Selena.
Hiya. Oh, I can't see myself. Oh, there I am. Hi, yeah, that's been brilliant. I'm actually not in your area, though. I may well be moving into your area. My experience is I've actually recently come up from England, where I was under the guidance, the care at Liverpool, which is a clinical centre of excellence for ME, and mixed messages coming out from that place. I was made to do graded exercise therapy, which put me in a wheelchair, which I've not got out of. So it's great to hear that Scotland now, hopefully, are going to be either adopting the new NICE guidance or creating our own up here, which would be great. I was very interested to hear what that lady who presented the stuff about the strategic planning partnershipy thingy was mentioning about the, in general, it seems either a lack of specialists in Dumfries and Galloway. Well, that also applies in South Ayrshire. So I was quite interested to hear that, whereas I have friends in Glasgow who seem to be able to access more consultants a lot more easily than we do down here. So I'm hoping that it sounds like up here now we're going to be moving in a very positive way. And if we've got, you know, we as in people with ME have got a team like yourselves behind you who seem very dynamic, very well, able to talk a lot, hopefully we'll be able to get something very positive in place, at least in Dumfries and Galloway. There's nothing really up here in South Ayrshire. We have the severe ME group based in Troon. And I don't know if you folk liaise with them at all, but it'd be very nice to try and see something similar being rolled out here in South Ayrshire and Ayrshire in general, because I think we also are in the wilderness. We certainly have no clinical lead, no clinical expert. If I was to go to my GP and even try and talk about my ME, they'd probably just look at me blankly. So I just wanted to say that, you know, it's great that these things are happening. And hopefully, you know, what you're doing down in Dumfries and Galloway, who knows, maybe that'll be rolled out across Scotland as an example of best practice. That's what I'm hoping.
Thanks very much for that, Selena, and it's great to hear your experiences both from Liverpool and the kind of down south, you know, sort of large urban centre, and but also your experiences from another rural board in Scotland, which of course, you know, we all have rural boards, particularly have real challenges in terms of recruitment and of staff, etc., and the ability for, as Liz was pointing out, the ability for us to provide specialist services at a local level. But I guess we're not talking about a tiny minority of people when we're talking about ME, chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia. And I guess even if we can't provide something, you know, a comprehensive, fully functioning, all singing, all dancing specialist service locally, we need to, people at least need to know where they can access that sort of support, and it's important that they're not kept in the wilderness, which it sounds like many people are. So we love it when people want to move to Dumfries and Galloway, so please do come and join us, that would be great.
Well, we are hoping to be offering on a house, so fingers crossed.
Excellent. Paul or Eileen or any of the network members, is there anything that you guys want to say about the partnership work with any the organisation that Selena outlined in Ayrshire and Arran, or any other kind of, is that something that can maybe be picked up on as making links with similar organisations elsewhere?
Grace, hi, I've just unmuted, it's Epi. I was just actually, while Selena was speaking there, I sent an email to the office bearers saying, oh, that's a good suggestion by Selena. Maybe we could consider that as part of an application for core funding at some point, you know, some learning visits and offering some other regions the possibility of connecting up with us. So actually, I think that's a really helpful suggestion, Selena. So thank you for that.
That's great, Epi. Thanks very much indeed for that. And as I was saying before, the network are in the process of developing their strategic plan and their operational plan. So all of these really good suggestions can help be integrated into the plans for the future. And Dumfries and Galloway has a long-standing relationship with NHS Ayrshire and Arran. So I'm sure that and there's similarities, of course, in terms of some of the rural issues. So I'm sure that would be a really helpful connection. Any other final questions, folks, then, before I hand over to Eileen? No? Okay. Thanks very much again, everyone, and I'll hand over to Eileen just to close off today.
Well, hello again. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And I hope that our reach of our organisation is extended now after this event. it's been quite amazing listening to all the questions and the speakers. And there's a lot to be positive about going forward. From the results of the research, one of the main stigmas is that of not being believed or understood. And it seems that is now our job, really, collectively, to further the information so that that stigma is significantly lessened. Dr. Lorna Bell, gave a fabulous explanation of the work done for the consultation. Dr. Charles Shepherd, as always, lots of information with regard to the NICE guidelines, and he's always on the end of an email if anybody wants to contact him through the ME Association. And Liz Forsyth, very good information with regard to being our own patient advocates. I think that's what we have to be. We have to be proactive. We have to know about our situation and our conditions, and we have to not exactly challenge our GPs, but make them think outside the box, because our GPs are not experts in everything. So it's always a good idea to be informed, so that you know what you're asking for and you know what your life is going to look like going forward. And obviously, thank you very much to everybody at Sleeping Giants for a fabulous event today and all the sterling work that they've done over the last year. As Grace said, if anybody wants any further information, she's going to send you through quite a lot of stuff through email. So please open it and please read it and please share it, because this is how we get our points across and our voices heard. So thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. And I hope at some point that we will meet again. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Eileen. If I could just ask the planning team just to stay back for a wee 5 minutes, that would be great. And thanks, everyone.
Sorry.
Does that include me?